Does cold exposure actually work? Science explained. Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to Vital Living. If you've been into fitness, biohacking, or longevity content over the past few years, you've almost certainly seen people talking about cold exposure. Whether it's cold showers, ice baths, or full cold plunges, it's become one of the most popular trends in the health and fitness space. Some people claim it can help with fat loss, muscle recovery, immune function, mood, testosterone, and even longevity. But here's the real question. Does cold exposure actually work? Or is it mostly hype? Today, I'm going to break this down in detail using what the actual science says, not just what influencers claim. We're going to look at the most common benefits people talk about, examine the evidence behind each one, and give you a realistic picture of what cold exposure can and cannot do. This isn't going to be a video that blindly praises cold exposure. And it's also not going to completely dismiss it. I'm going to be honest about both the potential benefits and the limitations, so you can make an informed decision about whether it's worth adding to your routine. So if you've been curious about cold exposure but want to know what's actually backed by evidence, stick around. Let's get into it. What is cold exposure? Cold exposure simply means deliberately exposing your body to cold temperatures for a period of time. This can include cold showers, ice baths, cold plunges, cold water swimming, cryotherapy chambers. Most people who practice it regularly do either cold showers or ice baths. The temperature usually ranges from around 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, 50 to 59 degrees Fahrenheit, for cold showers. And even colder, often 4 to 10 degrees Celsius, for ice baths. The idea behind cold exposure is that by putting your body under controlled stress, you can trigger various physiological adaptations that may be beneficial for health and performance. Popular claims about cold exposure. Before we look at the science, let's list out the most common claims people make about cold exposure. It helps with fat loss, especially brown fat activation. It improves muscle recovery and reduces soreness. It boosts the immune system. It improves mood and reduces depression, anxiety. It increases testosterone. It improves resilience and mental toughness. It has longevity benefits. Now let's go through each of these claims and see what the actual research says. Claim 1. Cold exposure helps with fat loss. This is one of the most popular claims. The idea is that cold exposure activates brown fat, which burns calories to generate heat, leading to fat loss. What the science says. There is some truth to this. Cold exposure can activate brown adipose tissue, brown fat. And brown fat does burn calories. However, the amount of calories burned is relatively small for most people. Studies show that while cold exposure can increase calorie expenditure, the effect is modest, usually in the range of 100 to 300 extra calories per session, depending on how cold it is and how long you stay in. For fat loss, this is not very significant compared to diet and exercise. Additionally, your body tends to adapt over time. The more you do cold exposure, the less of a metabolic effect it may have as your body becomes more efficient at maintaining temperature. Bottom line, cold exposure can slightly increase calorie burn, but it's not a meaningful fat loss tool on its own. Diet and training will have a much bigger impact. Claim 2. Cold exposure improves muscle recovery. This is another very common reason people take ice baths, to reduce muscle soreness and speed up recovery after training. What the science says. The evidence here is mixed. Some studies show that cold water immersion can reduce delayed onset muscle soreness, DOMS, in the short term. However, other research suggests that regularly using ice baths after strength training may actually blunt some of the muscle growth adaptations. The theory is that inflammation is part of the muscle building process. By aggressively reducing inflammation with cold exposure right after training, you might be interfering with the signaling that leads to muscle growth. For endurance athletes or people doing very high volumes of training, cold exposure might be more useful for recovery. For people focused on building muscle and strength, it might be better to avoid ice baths immediately after workouts. Bottom line: cold exposure can reduce soreness for some people, but it may not be ideal if your main goal is maximizing muscle growth. Claim 3. Cold exposure boosts the immune system. Many people claim that regular cold exposure makes you sick less often and strengthens your immune system. What the science says. There is some limited evidence that cold exposure might have a positive effect on the immune system. One notable study from the Netherlands found that people who took cold showers were slightly less likely to take sick days from work, though the effect was modest. However, the overall evidence is still relatively weak. Cold exposure does cause an increase in certain immune cells and anti-inflammatory markers. But whether this translates into fewer illnesses in real life is not yet clear. Bottom line: there might be a small immune benefit, but it's probably not as dramatic as many people claim. Lifestyle factors like sleep, stress, and overall diet likely have a much bigger impact on immune function. Claim 4. Cold exposure improves mood and mental health. This is one of the more interesting areas. Many people report feeling more alert, focused, and even happier after cold exposure. What the science says. There is growing evidence that cold exposure can have positive effects on mood. Cold water immersion has been shown to increase dopamine and norepinephrine levels significantly, sometimes by 200 to 300% or more. These neurotransmitters are involved in motivation, focus, and mood regulation. Some small studies and case reports have also shown that cold exposure may help with symptoms of depression and anxiety, possibly due to its effects on the nervous system and stress response. However, most of the research in this area is still preliminary. While many people subjectively feel better after cold exposure, we need more high-quality studies to confirm the mental health benefits. Bottom line: cold exposure does appear to increase alertness and can improve mood for many people. This seems to be one of the more legitimate benefits. Claim 5. Cold exposure increases testosterone. This claim is very popular in certain fitness and biohacking circles. What the science says. Currently, there is very little good evidence that cold exposure significantly increases testosterone levels in humans. Most of the claims seem to come from anecdotal reports or animal studies, which don't always translate to humans. Some people report feeling more energetic and having better libido after starting cold exposure. But this could be due to improved mood, better sleep, or placebo effect rather than actual changes in testosterone. Bottom line: there's currently no strong scientific evidence that cold exposure meaningfully increases testosterone in humans. Claim 6. Cold exposure builds mental resilience. This is more of a psychological claim than a physiological one. Many people say that regularly doing something uncomfortable like cold exposure builds mental toughness. What the science says. While there isn't much direct research on this specific claim, the idea makes logical sense. Deliberately doing something difficult and uncomfortable on a regular basis can train your ability to tolerate discomfort and regulate your stress response. Many people who practice cold exposure consistently report that it helps them handle stress better in other areas of life. This benefit is harder to measure scientifically but seems to be real for a lot of practitioners. Bottom line: this is one of the more subjective benefits, but many people find it valuable. Potential risks and downsides of cold exposure. Cold exposure isn't risk-free. Here are some things to be aware of. Cold shock response. Jumping into very cold water can cause a sudden gasp reflex and increased heart rate, which can be dangerous for people with heart conditions. Hypothermia risk. Staying in cold water for too long can be dangerous. Negative effects on muscle growth. As mentioned earlier, regular ice baths right after strength training might reduce some training adaptations. Discomfort and stress. For some people, especially those with high anxiety, cold exposure can feel overwhelming rather than beneficial. If you have any cardiovascular issues, it's important to talk to a doctor before starting cold exposure. Practical recommendations. If you want to try cold exposure, here's a simple and safe way to start. Start with cold showers. Begin with 30 to 60 seconds at the end of your normal shower. Gradually increase the time over weeks. Progress to ice baths if desired. Once you're comfortable with cold showers, you can try ice baths starting with 1 to 2 minutes and slowly building up. Best practices. Breathe slowly and controlled. Avoid hyperventilating. Start with 1 to 3 minutes and build up gradually. Do it consistently, 3 to 5 times per week, rather than extremely long sessions occasionally. Don't do ice baths immediately after heavy strength training if muscle growth is your priority. Realistic expectations. Cold exposure can be a useful tool, but it's not a miracle. The benefits that seem most supported by current evidence are increased alertness and improved mood, possible small immune benefits, potential reduction in muscle soreness, building comfort with discomfort. The claims around major fat loss, big testosterone increases, or dramatic longevity benefits are currently not well supported by strong evidence. Final thoughts. Cold exposure is neither completely useless nor as powerful as some people claim. It can be a useful addition to your routine if you enjoy it and do it safely, particularly for mood, alertness, and building mental resilience. However, it should not replace the fundamentals: sleep, nutrition, training, and stress management. These will have a much bigger impact on your health and results than cold exposure ever will. If you like cold exposure and feel good doing it, there's probably no harm in continuing, as long as you're safe. If you don't enjoy it, you're not missing out on anything life-changing by skipping it. At the end of the day, the best health practices are the ones you can actually stick with consistently. Cold exposure can be one tool in your toolkit, but it's far from the most important one. If you have any questions about cold exposure or want help building a simple routine, just let me know in the comments. Also, if you have any questions about anything I covered in this video, drop them below. I read pretty much every comment. If this video helped you get a more realistic view of cold exposure, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel. We post new content every week about fitness, biohacking, longevity, and building a stronger body while living a busy life. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate you. Stay consistent with the fundamentals, and I'll see you in the next one.